This photograph, discovered by police, would lead a heartbroken family to their loved one missing for almost 40 years.
Welcome to Watch Mojo, and today we're counting down our picks for the scariest and most disturbing pictures from famous true crime cases.
For heaven's sake, catch me before I kill more. I cannot control myself.
The Forchan murder post.
It says, quote, "I killed Amber Copeland. I strangled her with my hands, then a shoelace."
A controversial site, 4chan has seen its share of brutality throughout the years. One of the most notorious incidents occurred on November 5th, 2014, when an anonymous man posted a picture of what appeared to be a dead body. Accompanied with the grotesque image was the text, "Turns out it's way harder to strangle someone to death than it looks on the movies," and "She fought so damn hard." Naturally, many believed that this was a hoax, but this was no joke. Oregon man David Kallick later turned himself in for the murder of Amber Copeland, and the affidavit confirms the photo posted to 4chan matched the Copeland crime scene. Kallick was given 82 years in prison. Robert Picktons' farm.
For the families of the women brutalized and killed, Picktons' death marks the end of a traumatic chapter, even as questions about the extent of his crimes remain.
One of Canada's most notorious serial killers, Robert Picton, was active from the late 70s to the early 2000s, and it's believed he murdered at least 26 women, although he later confessed to an undercover officer that it was actually 49. He was finally apprehended in 2002, and his British Columbia farm was subjected to an enormous search valued at $70 million. In this unsettling photo, heavy machinery is used to sift through the mountains of soil in an attempt to find human remains. It's believed that Picton disposed of his victims at the farm, as personal items belonging to the murdered women were found on the property.
This is what's left of Robert Picton's notorious pig farm. Remnants of the pain he caused, tributes to the women he killed.
The Son of Sam car.
"Well," he said, "you got me." Police say those words ended the biggest manhunt in New York City history with the capture of Son of Sam.
Between 1976 and 77, New York City was plagued by a mysterious killer known as the Son of Sam. He committed 8 shootings in the span of a year, killing 6 and wounding even more. His MO was brazen and unpredictable. He seemed to target strangers totally at random, often when his victims were in their cars. He would approach unexpectedly, typically on foot, and open fire without provocation. Here we see the aftermath of one of the shootings, a brown 1968 Buick Skylark with its door open. This car belonged to Robert Violante, a clothing salesman who was on a first date with secretary Stacy Moskowitz. Son of Sam approached the car from the passenger side and shot both, killing Moskowitz and blinding Violante.
It was the largest task force New York ever assembled. 100 years from now, people will still know the name Son of Sam.
John Wayne Gacy and Rosalynn Carter.
His name is John Wayne Gacy, convicted of killing 33 innocent people and destroying hundreds of lives.
Some serial killers hide in plain sight, perhaps the most notorious example being John Wayne Gacy. Gacy posed as a respectable figure in his community, participating in various civic activities, and serving as a precinct captain for the Democratic Party. On May 6, 1978, he met First Lady Rosalynn Carter at a local political event, and an employee of the White House snapped this hair-raising photo. Gacy is seen wearing an S pin, indicating that he had undergone a background check by the Secret Service. This is especially chilling in hindsight, as Gacy had already murdered 29 men and buried them in the crawl space of his home. He would kill 4 more before being apprehended the following December.
What happened to what happened in the Bukovic case? Where was he picked up, and how did he get to the house, and what happened with him?
The Lindbergh Kidnapping, one of the biggest crimes of the 20th century, occurred on March 1st, 1932, when young Charles Lindbergh Jr. was kidnapped from his New Jersey home. The crime was pinned on a man named Bruno Hauptmann, but many have questioned his conviction and believe there is more to the story. The kidnapper used a homemade wooden ladder to reach the window, and this ladder was left at the scene after the kidnapping, lying in sections on the ground. In this photo, we see a recreation of the ladder and how it was used to reach the high window and abduct Lindbergh. It's a terrifying picture, showcasing vulnerability and pure human malice all at once.
It is the address and telephone number of Dr. Condon, The man who paid the ransom, written in your writing, found on a board in your closet.
The smiling Manson followers.
Are you always this happy?
Uh-huh.
What's the secret?
We found the truth.
The Manson family shocked the world in the late 1960s, killing at least 9 people and committing the infamous Tate murders of August 1969. Adding to the story's horrifying aura was the behavior of the accused while on trial. They all seemed detached from the brutal crimes they had just committed. Indeed, they were almost gleeful as they giggled and smiled in court as their crimes were recounted in graphic detail. Here we see Susan Atkins, Patricia Krenwinkel, and Leslie Van Houten looking positively cheerful as they walk away from receiving their death sentences. This type of behavior shocked the public and seemed to exemplify the cult's disturbing mindset.
She's a convicted killer and former follower of Charles Manson and is now free after spending more than 50 years in prison.
Travis Alexander.
This is around the time where she became very possessive of him.
Very possessive. She just had to sit right by him. She didn't appreciate when he was talking to another female.
This is one of the most notorious criminal cases in recent American history, occurring on June 4, 2008. Arizona salesman Travis Alexander was murdered in his home by an ex-girlfriend named Jodi Arias, who stabbed and shot Alexander while he was taking a shower. The two had a tumultuous relationship, and Alexander's friends did not like Arias, finding her troubling and obsessive. On the evening of June 4th, Arias entered Alexander's home and made her way to the bathroom. She then snapped this final photo of Alexander, just moments before she viciously stabbed him to death. It's certainly a haunting photo, his eyes emitting what looks like intense fear.
That leaves her left hand free. Could she have had the knife in her hand at that moment?
BTK.
You will find a homicide, 43 South Pershing, Nancy.
Dennis Rader is a famous serial killer, better known by the acronym BTK. He terrorized the Wichita area between 1974 and 1991, murdering at least 10 individuals. One of Rader's disturbing hobbies was dressing up in women's clothing, sometimes those of his victims, and often in connection with depraved elements of sexual gratification. He would sometimes wear masks and wigs to further fulfill these fantasies. For example, here we see a nightmarish photo of Rader dressed in what appears to be female garments and donning both a blonde wig and a clown mask. Psychologists often link this kind of behavior to issues of power, suggesting that his dressing up, much like his killings, was just another way to dominate and degrade his victims.
Sure, you like it. How do you like it? Because I was trying to catch you.
The Beast of Jersey mask.
Here's the plan, Sandins. You have until our provisions arrive, provisions which will help us break into your elegant home.
A little-known but deeply disturbing case occurred between 1957 and 1971 on the island of Jersey. This is an island country in Europe, found just off the northwest coast of France. A man named Edward Pasnell was a notorious serial predator who terrorized the small island, committing numerous home invasions and assaulting the women inside. His appearance resulted in his nickname, the Beast of Jersey, as he wore a grotesque and frightening mask made of rubber while committing his crimes. It looked somewhat like a disfigured and monstrous face, adding to the general horror of his crime spree. Pasnell was eventually caught in 1971 and given 30 years in prison.
Why are you doing this to us? Because you were home.
The Zodiac Letter.
To prove I killed them, I shall state some facts which only I and the police know.
Perhaps the most famous aspect of a true crime case, the Zodiac Letters are an enduring part of American history, having been referenced in literature and film for decades. Here we see a copy of one, addressed to Melvin Belli and sitting on the desk of Lieutenant Charles Ellis of the San Francisco Police Department. Belli was a prominent lawyer who had many famous clients, including Jack Ruby, the killer of Lee Harvey Oswald. The Zodiac mailed the Belli letter on December 20th, 1969. Inside was a desperate plea for help and a swatch of bloody clothing belonging to a victim named Paul Stein. Stein was the Zodiac's final confirmed victim, his death occurring on October 11th, just 2 months before this letter was sent.
This is the Zodiac speaking. I am the murderer of the taxi driver over by Washington Street and Maple Street last night. To prove this, here is a blood-stained piece of his shirt. I am the same.
Salah Abdeslam. On November 14, 2015, 2 men were captured on camera walking near a French gas station. One was wearing a black jacket and walking with his hands in his pockets.
These pictures were taken a day later at a Belgian petrol station.
The photo doesn't look like much, but it becomes terrifying once the context becomes clear. The man in the black jacket is terrorist Salah Abdeslam, and he had just helped commit a series of attacks in Paris.
The morning after the attacks, he's seen on surveillance video in northern France.
Occurring the night before the photo was taken, the coordinated attacks killed 130 people and injured more than 400. Abdeslam was the only perpetrator to survive, and he called his friends to pick him up. They did so, and Abdeslam was captured on camera while fleeing the country. He was later captured and sentenced to life in prison.
The next day, he's seen at a petrol station in France, waved through a border check into Belgium.
Christopher Wilder. Throughout a period of 6 weeks in 1984, Christopher Wilder embarked on a cross-country trip from Florida to California.
It was the beginning of a string of brutal and terrifying murders that spread out across the country.
Along the way, he abducted and sexually assaulted at least 12 individuals. He's also been linked to 8 murders, although the true number is likely higher. On April 1st, Wilder attended a fashion show in Las Vegas hosted by 17 magazine. In one picture taken on that fateful day, Wilder can be seen sitting in the background, wearing white pants and a dark jacket.
And who's directly beyond her, about 20 feet away, looking at her with what I call the look of a homicidal maniac, none other than Christopher Wilder.
An aspiring model named Michelle Korfman would disappear from this event, and her body was found 1 month later near a rest stop. Her death was later linked to Christopher Wilder, who had abducted her from the fashion show.
They announced the placement of Christopher Wilder on its famed 10 Most Wanted Fugitives list.
Death masks. Found in the Cleveland Police Museum are a series of death masks hanging on the wall. It's an unbelievably eerie sight. Not only is the concept of human heads hanging on a wall disturbing, but the death masks look eerily realistic. These grotesque decorations date back to the 1930s, when they were made in the midst of the city's most infamous killing spree.
The victims often went unidentified. The killer always escaped undetected.
The still unidentified Cleveland torso murderer killed at least 13 people between 1934 and 1938. Because most of the victims were transients, it was very difficult to identify them, especially considering what happened to their bodies.
In February 1937, the torso of another unidentified woman washed up on the shores of Lake Erie.
Enter these plaster death masks of the victims, which were displayed to the public in the hopes of someone recognizing their faces. Tyler Hadley's Party. 2 young men pose for the camera, one of whom is holding a drink. That man is Tyler Hadley, and he had just killed his parents. In fact, their bodies were still upstairs.
Tyler Hadley and Michael Mandel took this picture Saturday night. It was the last picture Mandel thought he'd ever take with his best friend.
Hadley killed his mother and father earlier in the day, hid their bodies in the master bedroom, then used their credit cards to fund a party that dozens of people attended. The other man in the photo is Michael Mandel. Hadley told Mandel of the crime, and Mandel even found the bodies in the bedroom. Regardless, he stayed at the party and even took this selfie with Hadley. It wasn't until Mandel had left the party hours later that he reported the crime to the authorities.
After I found his parents, I knew it was going to be the last time I seen him. This is that look on his face. You could see the horror in his face.
John Edward Robinson holding Tiffany Stacy. The photo is of poor quality, but the content is clear. A happy group of people are centered around a man wearing a yellow sweater. This man is holding a very young baby who is adorably dressed in white. But that baby is not his own. In fact, he killed the baby's mother and stole her. The man is serial killer John Edward Robinson, who took the lives of at least 8 people. He befriended a young mother named Lisa Stacy, killed her, and took her young daughter Tiffany, later posing for this photo.
She disappeared. Forever.
He then sold Tiffany to his brother and sister-in-law, who quote-unquote adopted her, for $5,500 in quote-unquote legal fees. It would be 15 years before Tiffany Stacy learned of her true identity.
Justice and closure for me is finding her remains and giving her a proper burial.
The Shawn Moore crime scene. A child's bicycle lies abandoned on the roadside while a police officer speaks to witnesses in the background. This is a startlingly great picture, conveying a primal sense of fear and danger and letting you know that something is definitely not right. This bike belongs to Shawn Moore, who was riding home from a convenience store when he was forcibly abducted by Ronald Bailey. The bike was left behind, a painful reminder of Moore's interrupted life. Bailey took Moore to a secluded cabin where he proceeded to drug, assault, and eventually kill him. Bailey was later found guilty of first-degree murder and kidnapping and sentenced to life in prison. The Mad Bomber of New York. Everything about George Metesky is terrifying. Throughout the 1940s and 50s, Metesky earned the moniker the Mad Bomber, as he planted explosives in many public areas around New York. While these bombings never killed anyone, they left 15 people injured. Metesky was finally identified and caught in 1957 and taken to the Waterbury Police Headquarters. A photographer took a picture of Metesky inside his jail cell, and the result is absolutely blood-chilling. Metesky glances out of his cell, a gleeful smile plastered on his face, and his eyes depicting a complete loss of reality. Metesky was found legally insane, with the judge calling him, quote, hopeless and incurable both mentally and physically. James Bulger. This famous photograph depicts James Bulger, who is walking through a mall and holding the hand of an older boy. Another boy wearing a darker jacket walks in front. These two are Robert Thompson and John Venables, and they are in the process of discreetly kidnapping Bulger. The young boy was shopping with his mother at the New Strand shopping center when she briefly took her eyes off him to pay for some groceries.
It was just a split seconds, and I think that's going to live with me for the rest of my life.
It was then that Thompson and Venables swooped in and guided Bulger away by hand. His body was found 2 days later near some railway tracks. A man, his daughter, and a car bomb. For a period of about 30 years, Northern Ireland was embroiled in a political conflict known as the Troubles. This ended with the Good Friday Agreement in 1998. But this ceasefire was not honored by a splinter group of the Irish Republican Army called the Real IRA. As a form of protest, they planted a car bomb in the town of Omagh.
A bomb has exploded in the center of Omagh, and there are reports that a number of people have been killed.
It went off on August 15, 1998, killing 29 and injuring hundreds. In this photograph, taken shortly before the bombing, a man in a yellow sweater holds a child on his shoulders. Right beside them is the red car in which the bomb was planted. Both the man and the child survived, but the photographer was one of the 29 fatalities.
About 100 people have been injured. It's the worst bomb attack in 30 years of terrorism in the province.
Regina K Walters. It's one of the most visceral photos in true crime. A girl wearing a black dress holds her hands towards the camera. An obvious defensive gesture that elicits great fear of whoever is behind the camera. That whoever was a man named Robert Ben Rhodes, who may have killed more than 50 women while working as a truck driver. He took this haunting snapshot of Walters shortly before strangling her to death, and Walters' decomposing body was later found on the same farm depicted in the image.
When I saw those photos, I said, this is Regina Walters.
The photo was later found by investigators in Rhodes' house. If it's any consolation, it was Walters' death for which Rhodes was convicted and finally put away.
Rhodes was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole.
Leonard Lake's cabin. This photo is quite unassuming at first. It's an aerial shot of a rubble-strewn building with various crew members working amongst the debris. It's a sight that millions of people see every day on their way to and from work. But this is actually the compound of Leonard Lake, and it hosted some nightmarish atrocities. Lake and his accomplice, Charles Ng, took their victims to this cabin in the Sierra Nevada foothills and committed horrible acts against them before ending their lives. It's believed that the duo killed up to 25 people inside the cabin, and authorities later found the likes of videotapes and human remains at the site. Sheree Miller. In July of 1984, a man named William Bradford met young bartender Sheree Miller at the meat market in Los Angeles. After convincing Miller that he was a professional photographer, he extended a proposition to take some photos of her. She agreed, and the two drove north into the desert of California. Bradford took various photographs of Miller, who can be seen wearing a pair of denim shorts. Soon after the photos were taken, Bradford killed Miller and took her body back to Hollywood, where he abandoned it in an alley. Bradford was a predator who was out on bail at the time of Miller's killing. She was just one of a potential 28 victims. Dahmer's Drum. It's amazing how a story can recontextualize a picture. This seemingly harmless photo depicts a blue plastic drum in the corner of an old room. Nothing too strange or malicious, until you realize what's inside the vat. It belonged to Jeffrey Dahmer, who is probably the most notorious serial killer in American history. One of Dahmer's survivors took note of the drum while inside the house and noticed a very strong and unpleasant smell coming from it. When Dahmer was finally caught, investigators uncovered the drum and found it was filled with hydrochloric acid and human remains. Dahmer was going full Breaking Bad and dissolving his victims inside the drum. John Lennon and Mark David Chapman. A very famous photo taken by Paul Goresh shows John Lennon signing an autograph while a man in glasses stands over his left shoulder. Thousands of photos just like this were taken throughout Lennon's career, but this one is steeped in malice. This photo was taken around 5 p.m. on the evening of December 8, 1980. Nearly 6 hours later, Lennon returned home and was shot by the man in the photo.
Lennon was shot and killed at about 11 o'clock last night outside his apartment building.
The very same man he had given an autograph to earlier in the evening. This, of course, is Mark David Chapman, and he had been planning to kill Lennon for months. While Chapman watched Lennon sign his album, he knew he would kill him just a few hours later. Karen Sprinker.
Here's 5-year-old Jerome Brudos. He finds this pair of women's shoes. Something had made him pick those up.
Throughout the late 1960s, a man named Jerry Brudos killed at least 4 women in Oregon.
So he brings home this pair of women's shoes, and he begins to wear them around the house.
One of them was an 18-year-old named Karen Sprinker. On March 27, 1969, Brudos was wearing women's clothing and scoured a department store parking lot for victims. He found Sprinker and kidnapped her at gunpoint.
She was beautiful. I said I'd take some photos of her.
Is that when you invited her in?
Brudos then took her to his personal garage and made her put on underwear while he took photos. One of them has been released and shows a calm-looking Sprinker gazing into the lens. Shortly after the photo was taken, Brudos killed Sprinker and put her body into the Willamette River. Ted's tools. Few serial killers are as notorious as Ted Bundy. His name is synonymous with evil, and he may have killed up to 36 women throughout the mid-70s.
While detectives tried to track a man who slipped into a sorority house early yesterday and murdered 2 women.
The killer struck first at the Chi Omega sorority house. Police say he was armed with a heavy oak log.
Bundy was arrested in the early morning of August 16, 1975 by patrolman Bob Hayward, and when Hayward searched Bundy's vehicle, he discovered a treasure trove of suspicious material. Inside the Volkswagen Beetle, and later photographed for the world to see, were the likes of garbage bags, an ice pick, rope, gloves, a ski mask, and more. Unfortunately, there wasn't enough solid evidence to hold Bundy at the time, and he was promptly released from custody.
Washington missed you. Utah gave you away. Colorado lost you. I'm gonna fry you.
He went on to kill again before he was finally captured for good in February of 1978. The Columbine class picture. It's pictures like this that prove the volatility of life. You never know the types of people you're literally sitting beside.
Parents, hug your kids. Be happy that you're with them. Kids, grab your friends, hold them tight, and never be mad at people because it could happen in a second that they'll be gone.
This photo shows the Columbine High School class of 1999. In the top left corner, some boys can be seen making gun gestures with their hands. 2 of these boys are Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold, who just weeks later would enact the historic Columbine attack. On April 20th, 1999, Harris and Klebold killed 13 at their high school. The perps would also take their own lives, bringing the total body count to 15. Even more were injured, and Columbine became an international talking point. Rodney Alcala's photos. A vicious man who killed at least 8. Rodney Alcala is famously known as the dating game killer, as he once appeared on the titular game show.
Between takes, he might find him skydiving or motorcycling. Please welcome Rodney Alcala. Rod, welcome.
While searching his home and his personal storage locker, investigators found over 1,000 photographs, many of which depicted people in sensual poses. 120 of these photos were eventually released to the public in the hopes of identifying the subjects. The released photographs are not explicitly sensual in nature, but merely depicts people, mainly young women, posing in artful manners.
The San Antonio police refused to take a missing persons report on Chris because she was an adult.
It's unclear how many of these subjects were killed by Alcala, but at least one missing persons case, that of 28-year-old Christine Thornton, was solved with the help of the photographs.
Her smile shared by a tragic list of young women and girls who trusted a charming stranger, only to discover a dark secret that began back in the fall of 1968.
A message from the lipstick killer.
Later that morning in the bedroom, police found a crumpled up ransom note left by the culprit. It read, "Get $20,000 ready and wait for word. Do not notify FBI or police. Bills in 5s and 10s."
While his conviction is controversial, the lipstick killer is thought to be Illinois criminal William Herons. The lipstick killer got his name from a particularly creepy crime scene, and this crime scene was famously photographed. Frances Brown was killed inside her apartment, and the perp left behind a message for whoever came across her body. Scrawled on the wall in lipstick were the words, "For heaven's sake, catch me before I kill more. I cannot control myself." Unfortunately, the killer did indeed strike again, kidnapping and taking the life of the young Suzanne Degnan. This occurred just 1 month after the death of Brown. Before we continue, be sure to subscribe to our channel and ring the bell to get notified about our latest videos. You have the option to be notified for occasional videos or all of them. If you're on your phone, make sure you go into settings and switch on your notifications. Edgans House. The inspiration behind numerous fictional killers like Norman Bates and Leatherface, Ed Gein is a notorious body snatcher who fashioned himself one nightmarish house. Gein would dig up corpses from graveyards around Plainfield, Wisconsin, and use their bones and skin to make household objects. When authorities searched Gein's house, they found the likes of garbage bins, upholstery, bedposts, bowls, and lampshades, all of which were made from human remains. Many photos were taken of Gein's house, most of which depict a horribly cluttered space filled with trash and furniture. It's eerie to think how much of that stuff was made out of the recently exhumed. Perhaps the scariest picture is that of a chair upholstered with old and leathery-looking skin. What pictures scared you the most? Let us know in the comments below.
There's your rag the kids talked about. So you got in the front seat to tear off a piece of the shirt.
Did you enjoy this video? Check out these other clips from WatchMojo, and be sure to subscribe and ring the bell to be notified about our latest videos.